Have you noticed this contradiction in Dr. Stone? Season 3 has finally introduced the fan favorite Ryusui, his butler Francois, and their famous catchphrase, "Greed equals justice." There's a discrepancy between the anime and manga translations that I'll explain later in the video, but this is the basic idea, and the other characters are totally okay with it, which is really weird considering how selfless they are. Hell, Dr. Stone in general is a selfless manga. It's a story about saving the entire human population. It's a story where the characters go out of their way to save good guys and bad guys, and go through painstaking efforts to make silly little things like ramen and cotton candy just to make someone else smile. You have a story like this, then Ryusui shows up, and suddenly it starts promoting the idea that the characters should be selfish. So the question becomes, how does being selfish fit into a story where everything the characters do is selfless? Well, let's start with a direct quote from the main character. In Season 3, Episode 2, the characters are convincing Minami to trade them her revival fluid. In exchange, they promise to build something that she wants. Chrome hears this, and he's like, oh boy, sounds like we're gonna have to use some science. To which, Senku responds, "To want is the driving force behind science." Now, some of you sharp manga readers might have noticed that this isn't a direct quote from the manga. I did, which made me think this was anime original. But when I looked at the manga, this scene pretty much happens panel for panel, and Senku basically touches on this idea. He's just a lot more on the nose in the anime. So, we have this idea that wanting something is what drives science. When you see that, you should be like, well, doi, of course. Because we've seen this a bunch of times in Dr. Stone. Senku wants to revive people, so he discovers the miracle fluid. Suika wants to see, so Senku makes her glasses. Byakuya wants to leave Senku a final message, so he makes a record. Minami wants to be a photographer again, and so Senku makes a camera. It's a subtle yet profound element of science, because you would think that pursuing science means being completely rational, but that couldn't be further from the truth. If you're someone in the field of mathematics, biology, physics, engineering, odds are it's because you enjoy doing that. I mean, just look at any Neil deGrasse Tyson video. Look at how excited this man gets talking about space rocks. It's the exact same thing when we see Senku makes a sonar, Chrome puts 2 and 2 together, and realizes you can use the same basic invention as a metal detector. They would never have made the metal detector if Chrome wasn't such a dork and he didn't want to make new inventions. This is because science is never 100% rational. Because science might exist in the universe as the laws of physics and thermodynamics and whatnot, but science as we experience it is a human phenomenon. And humans are subjective creatures. It's the same reason why in a universe full of millions of stars and black holes warping time and space, humans care more about whether we should pour milk before our cereal. By nature, science is subjective in the sense that it only evolves to fit our desires. So when Ryusui shows up and Francois says greed equals justice, they're not saying anything we haven't heard. It's a core element of science and a recurring theme of Dr. Stone. But there's still just one problem. This idea is exactly what Tsukasa was warning us about. But before I explain why that is, make sure to like the video if you're enjoying it so far. It's the easiest way to support the channel, and it helps spread the video to other viewers like you. Now, remember when we revived Tsukasa and he started a whole war because he didn't want science to bring back the greed of the modern era? Tsukasa was okay with some science, but he believed that fully restoring civilization would bring back the weapons of the modern age, thus leading to the same gaps between those in power and those at the bottom. And what's the first thing they do after Senku freezes Tsukasa? They wake up a guy who instantly declares he's going to take over the world. Which is hilarious because we have Tsukasa saying, for 2 seasons, hey man, we should be careful who we bring back. It's gonna lead to greedy people. And then we have Minami and the others saying, I don't know, this guy is pretty greedy, it might not be such a good idea. And Senku's like, I don't care man, I just want my trust fund Luffy. And of course, as soon as we revive Ryusui, the first thing he does is introduce money to the stone world. Literally the last thing Tsukasa wanted to see happen. So the revival of Ryusui is an opening of Pandora's box in a way, because the characters bring back everything Tsukasa was worried about as soon as he's revived. And yet, all of the characters are fine. Which begs the question, how could Tsukasa be totally right and wrong at the same time? Well, this is because Ryusui isn't greedy in the traditional sense. And here's where we need to pick apart his famous catchphrase. So in the English manga, we're given desire is noble. In the anime, we get greed equals justice. The anime phrase is actually more accurate because it's the same as the Japanese manga, which in Japanese reads Hoshi ikoru seigi. Now, people have said that there's a big difference between the two, but there really isn't, because the word greed has a much more selfish connotation than desire, but that's not the case in Japanese. The characters use the word hoshi. Hoshi translates to want or need in English, so I'm assuming they went with desire in the manga because it sounds a bit flashier than want. Now, the Japanese word hoshi actually has the kanji for greed, or in Japanese, yoku. So the terms greed, desire, and want are basically interchangeable, which is exactly the case in the anime, because if you listen closely to the Japanese dub, you'll notice that Ryusui goes back and forth between hoshi and yoku. TLDR, greed isn't necessarily selfish in this case. Now, we still have the noble versus justice part of the translations. Noble is a bit more ambiguous as it refers to a personal quality that people find admirable, such as honesty or bravery, whereas justice is much more specific. Justice can be considered noble, but it's obviously a specific noble quality. So when we break this phrase down, what we get is the idea that it's good to want, or alternatively, it's right to want. Interpreted this way, the phrase greed equals justice is totally consistent with Dr. Stone. It goes back to everything we talked about earlier about how science is driven by wanting. And of course, wanting isn't necessarily selfish, because people want stuff all the time. It doesn't mean it's always at the expense of others. And yet, there's still this debate of whether wanting something is intrinsically selfish simply because you're acting in your own interest rather than everyone else's. Fortunately, Dr. Stone addresses this concern right away. When Senku says that they should probably scale down their ship, Ryusui thinks back to his younger days when he was told to put his desires aside for the good of others. To which he basically said, "Eat my shorts," cheated the stock market, built his own racetrack, and started designing his very own cruise ship. In response, his family accuses him of recklessly indulging in whatever he pleases. When asked if they agree, Francois claims that they're completely wrong. They say that Ryusui doesn't just chase things aimlessly. He does what he wants because he values being honest with himself and his desires, even though it's easier to ignore your dreams and hide behind logic and reasoning, which is fine. Pursuing your desires doesn't mean disregarding everyone else's. To the contrary, Senku and Ryusui make it their mission to fulfill the dreams of those around them, because they're aware that people are selfish, not in the sense that they don't care about others, but in the sense that they have their own desires. We see in their actions that they do things for themselves while at the same time doing it for someone else. There's a bunch of examples, but let's go back to Minami. Minami trades revival fluid in exchange for a camera. It's selfish in the sense that she's only doing it so she can get what she wants. But is there anything wrong with that? No. It's beautiful to see the story of how she got her very first camera when she was little, and how she carried that first love into her career as a journalist. And not long after that, what does she do with her camera? She photographs the kingdom of science so she can tell their story, and so they can remember these moments should anything happen to Senku's team once they leave. She's pursuing her own love for photography while at the same time practicing it for the sake of others. That, in short, is the selfless greed of Dr. Stone. Being honest with what you want while at the same time making your desires the dreams of others. So, now I'd like to hear what you think. How would you interpret greed equals justice? How would you describe greed in Dr. Stone? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. And if you'd like another discussion like this one, then make sure to check out my recent Dr. Stone video. In that video, I discuss why Dr. Stone replaced Tsukasa and how it improved the story. You can find that video in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.